one back over the top, just a little bit, Ted, if you can pick it up there. That's it. That's it. How's that? Martin?
The scene at Pinewood Studios, England, last December, as construction of the main set for the Agatha Christie whodunit Death on the Nile neared completion. The film has been co-produced by John Brabourne and Richard Goodwin, the partnership responsible for Murder on the Orient Express. And once again it boasts a distinguished cast, including Peter Ustinov as Hercule Poirot, Mia Farrow, David Niven and Betty Davis. The ambitious set at Pinewood represents the River Nile at night, and these mud banks will soon be awash as water floods into the studio tank to provide an impressively realistic setting for the one star of the picture who doesn't get a screen credit, the Nile steamer Karnak, on which most of the action takes place. The Karnak at Pinewood Studios is a replica of an old paddle steamer that the filmmakers found in Cairo, and it's been meticulously recreated by the production team. As the carpenters transform the designer's plans into a physical reality, fitting props and securing rivets, and the first coat of paint was applied to the interiors, John Brabourne talked about the making of Death on the Nile.
You've probably seen it already in the film, yes.
Have you had any dealings with Agatha Christie herself, either on Murder on the Orient Express or this one?
Yes, at the time of when we first thought of making Murder on the Orient Express, she was still alive. This was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And I approached her and asked her about it. She wasn't too keen to start with because she's had, on the whole, a very unhappy time with the film companies who made previous films of her books, particularly the Hercule Poirot books, and she wasn't too keen to start with. And in fact, our conversation went on for 18 months, 2 years, before eventually we persuaded her to let us have the rights of Murder on the Orient Express.
She's a fairly tough negotiator, was she?
Well, not so much negotiator, but she wanted to be sure that she got to know the people who were going to make the film now about her books.
Did she see Poirot, I wonder, as in terms of any particular actor?
No. No, she thought he was a very difficult person to portray on the screen, because everybody, and rightly, in fact, everybody had a sort of their own idea. She had hers, and I don't think anybody had exactly come up to it. She was very, very, unfortunate she never saw Peter Ustinov, obviously, but she was very, very thrilled by Albert Finney's performance.
Obviously, Peter Ustinov's performance is going to be quite different. Do you think that's going to be at all unsettling for an audience?
No, not at all. I think if we tried to find somebody who would do it the same way as Albert Finney, that would have been a mistake. And luckily, you know, this is a totally different performance, you say.
The book gives nothing at all to go on. I mean, it just says, Poirot, he's a little man of comical appearance with immense black moustaches. What sort of figure do you see him as?
A rather larger man with a rather solemn black moustache, well cultivated. Well, I don't take that very seriously, because I read the portion of her own autobiography now where she talks about having conceived Poirot, and it was all done by a process of elimination. She wanted to have somebody as distinctive as Sherlock Holmes, but he couldn't be a tall, thin man, so it had to be a small, more orotund character, and she thought she'd make him French in order to get right out of Sherlock Holmes's hair, but then thought that was too obvious, and so made him Belgian, which is another compromise. So as somebody who is really the result of a series of compromises, I feel quite free to make a third one, or a fourth, or a 16th, or a 29th compromise, and play it according to my own shape, without any regard for his height in the book, or his domed head, or his little grey cells.
What about his accent? Since he's Belgian, do you give us a Belgian Poirot?
No, I give you a French one, because I think most Belgians like to speak French in a very French way, but get very hurt if you think they're French. That's a complex which France produces on the Swiss as well, and on the Canadians, in fact. And I think he speaks French with the elegance which his moustache decrees. You can't speak with a regional accent if you've got a moustache as thin and pointed and twisted as mine. It's like wrought iron, I like to think.
Did Agatha Christie make any stipulations at all as to the film treatment of her stories?
None at all. She sent me a copy of the play which she wrote of Death on the Nile, which she'd written out Poirot completely. On the stage, he doesn't appear in the play at all.
Well, I keep on appearing down here in order to see what's going on, because I can't quite remember myself what the storyline is. It's extremely complicated. It's a group of passengers on a... I mean, it's always roughly the same formula with her, in which it's constructed like a law case already. I mean, it's already really in court. And in Orient Express, it was people on a train who were all had some reason to do away with someone. Here we're all on a boat with some reason to do away with someone. It's a little more comfortable here because a boat tends to be wider than a train. Different gauge altogether. And I told John Gilliman, the director, that it's his first big horizontal picture. He's done King Kong and Towering Inferno, which were big vertical pictures, and now he's got 5 corpses, I think I've given it away now, and a flat-bottomed boat on the Nile.
David Niven, I hate to interrupt a gentleman during the holy hour reading his newspaper, but is there any good news?
Well, this paper I found on the set. We're now making Death on the Nile, you know, which is a 1932 dated movie, and this is a 1932 dated newspaper. This is The Observer. And I just see right here, we're looking up travel. Wait a minute, I found, here we are. Christmas cruise, Morocco, Spain, Portugal, 12 days, 12 guineas. And here's another one, which I just spotted. You can go to the West Indies for 7 weeks on the Duchess of Richmond. Do you think she'd mind? Well, anyway,
She'd be terribly pleased.
I'm enchanted to see you.
Oh, my old friend, how capital, how capital.
Yes.
Oh, I haven't clapped eyes on you since, that strange affair of the decapitated clergyman.
Yes, yes.
I still think you were a trifle lucky to find that cake knife up the chimney like that.
Lucky? With me, it's the exercise of the little grey cells. Luck, I leave to the others.
Yes, I'd forgotten your opinions about yourself.
Oh, yeah.
Might one ask, what are you doing here?
I'm only vacances. Shortly, I'm going up the Nile on the steamer. And you?
The same, oddly enough.
Oh. In other words, you're following one of the passengers.
No. Seulement les vacances, mon ami.
Oh?
Like yourself.
Yeah.
Tell us about Colonel Race. He helps Poirot out, doesn't he?
Well, Colonel Race, you know, in the book, I think there were 16 suspects. And I think in our movie there are 9. They've cut out a lot of suspects. And Race in the book was a sort of red herring. I think he was chasing another villain or something. So he'd been sabotaged out of one and put into the other in some strange way. Yes, he goes along with Poirot all the time. But whether he's a suspect or not, we have to leave to the buyers.
You do an Agatha Christie. And
among the baker's dozen of passengers on the Carnac is Jim Ferguson, and on the Pinewood set, actor John Finch explained his character.
Idealist, postgraduate, and the one thing which is never clear actually in the screenplay is what he's doing on a boat, because he's very, very poor and enormously resentful of all these very wealthy people. So we've decided that he's been given a bursary or something like that, you know, and he's travelling the Nile, but he has the same cabins as the other people, including the wealthiest woman in the world, of course. But he's just exceptionally irritated, you know, by money. And we figure he's on his way to the Spanish Civil War, you know, being the date being 1930. That's how he's going to end up.
When you say we figure that, there's not very much for you to build a character on, is there?
No, very little. The only really solid, I mean, there are marvellous cameo parts, but the only really solid character is Poirot, because Agatha Christie built him up over a series of novels, you know.
So how do you cope with the slightness of the character in that sense?
Well, you don't. I mean, it would be unfair to say you resort to tricks, but in fact, you go back into all the things you learnt in the theatre.
This chair is free, eh?
In this world, comrade, nothing's free.
Bitte?
Oh, forget it. Sit down.
Thank you. You are reading Das Kapital.
Never travel without it.
Oh. Dr. Ludwig Bessner of the Bessner Institute, Zurich.
Jim Ferguson, citizen of the world.
You are on holiday, perhaps, huh?
No. I am observing the decline of the capitalist system, my friend.
Oh, indeed. Well, you've got a good specimen there, huh? The young Kaugumi heiress.
That parasite.
You don't approve?
She makes me sick. In any decent society.
But you have, in a sense, cornered the market in whodunits, not thrillers, but whodunits. Why did people not latch on to that years ago, I wonder?
Well, years ago, of course, they used to make them, and then for a very long time they didn't. And then we had this, well, matter of fact, about 7 years ago, when we first discussed making Metropolitan Express, then something arose, we made another picture, and then we both, Richard Goodwin and I, felt the time had come to do a whodunit. And, well, that was an enormous success. So obviously we'd like to do another one, because we think they are good stories, I mean, fantastic stories in themselves. But I don't think there are a great many of them, because it depends on the setting.
You need a fairly exotic location, not the home county.
You need something, yes, exactly. I mean, you need something, what's different about each of these is where it's set, and the cast, and of course the stories are different. But basically, Agatha Christie whodunits are a set of people, all in an enclosed place where they can't get away, either in a country home where they're snowed up, or, you know, in a train where they're all cut up, or a boat on the Nile. And therefore the settings are of enormous importance.
As the carpenters painstakingly recreated the paddle steamer Karnak on the Pinewood soundstage, production designer Peter Merton was asked how closely his set resembled the original boat used for location shooting on the Nile.
Exactly, inch for inch. In this stage here, we've had to leave about 13 feet off the bows because we couldn't get it in the stage. But everything else is exactly as it is.
And the only thing missing, of course, is the water.
Well, that'll be added in a few days now. You're actually standing in the tank now.
So this floor has been specially built over the studio floor?
That's right. It's a bitumen floor that is going to hold about 12 inches of water, into which we can put waves, ripples, foam, currents, plopping fish if we had to, perhaps.
Now, how much trouble have you gone to get the banks right, the banks of the Nile?
Well, we do it all from pictures, and I was there for 7 or 8 weeks, so that one gets to know them very well. And these are all banks which, although they look rather flat, are in fact banks which is the sediment left on the Nile from its recurring floods, which nowadays are left there because the high dam has cut down all flooding, so you're left with this high, muddy bank, which is fairly easy to reproduce.
I love big sets because they're easier to work on because you've got more room to move. They don't get hot either. Also, I was a technician for years and years before I was an actor, and I was a carpenter and electrician and whatever, and I worked not on film studios, but on the stage, building sets as big as this. And this one is exceptionally beautifully built, very, very meticulously done.
Does it help you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the props have got to be right and the set's right, and you feel at home. And it's very difficult to feel at home in front of a camera, but if you've got something which is as solid and as real as this particular boat, it helps you, you know, to work.
Well, now, looking at the cyclorama, it's quite clearly a night scene. The stars are out. I'm bound to ask, why build this at all? Why not shoot it all in Egypt?
Well, night shooting has its peculiarities. You have to have many lights. Although you're shooting at night, you have to have many lights which, in the middle of the Nile, you've got nowhere to put apart from moving boats, and then your lamps would be moving up and down, not in rhythm with a boat. So it's the only way of doing it, if you're on a scene of this sort, is to recreate it.
No crocodiles on the Nile these days, I hope, are there?
Not these days. Well, we hope not, because although not many of us fell in, one or two did, but they were all right.
I mean, the biggest problem of all was communications. My co-producer, Richard Goodwin, you know, he was out there all the time, and I was back here for most of the time, and it really wasn't possible for me to leave and go out there because somebody had to be here. to try and deal with some of the problems as they arose, because there was no telephone. And really, the mind boggles me if I had been told that I was going to ever sit around making a picture of this size, a 5-week location in thousands of miles away without a telephone, I would have said it was impossible. We had to talk on the telex, which is a very different thing.
Fabulous, isn't it? You're the Ridgway girl, aren't you?
And you're Mrs. Van Schuyler. I wondered if we'd ever break the ice.
Well, I seldom talk to strangers, but never to strange honeymooners.
I'm glad you're breaking your rule.
Well, rules are made to be broken. At least mine are, by me. Oh, they're beautiful.
Thank you.
And amazing, if you know how they're made. A tiny piece of grit makes its way into an oyster, which eventually becomes a pearl of great price hanging round the neck of a pretty girl like you.
I never thought of it that way.
Well, you should. The oyster nearly dies.
The presence of an undisputed Hollywood legend amongst the suspects prompted an obvious question to the film's co-producer, Richard Goodwin.
Is it a pleasure to work with a hugely talented star cast, or are there too many egos rubbing against each other?
No, funny enough, it's the reverse. The more egos you have, the less trouble. They're all vying with each other to be the most professional. We've got Betty Davis, of course, who is the most professional person you can possibly imagine, bringing her own makeup, mirrors and lights to Egypt, and all, just in case they didn't have any there. Once you get someone like that on the cast, you don't really have any problems with anybody else.
I can't picture Betty Davis not being the first one on the set, not being ready for her performance, not being up if everybody else were to be up at 5, not being up at 4. Not being totally involved in what she does. I can't envision it. I don't think anybody can.
How much difficulty did you have finding a steamer actually on the Nile for the exteriors?
Well, we had to really start finding out who actually operated the boats first of all, which were governed down, it came down to about 3 or 4 companies. And we had to find the ones which were available, because these boats have several 100,000 people a year going up and down the Nile. And we found this little one that had the minimum of bookings. So the producers then did their deal with them. And we found this one in Cairo, sitting by the banks, waiting for its next season to start, and there we were.
How much did you have to do to it?
Well, we had to really refurbish the whole thing. The engines needed overhauling, and we had to build new decks on the top because they were rather rotten. And we built a new gantry around the front of it so that it would suit our action, because we had people walking right along the deck rather than just halfway along, because the original boat just had a gantry up to halfway and then nothing in front here. So we had to recreate that.
And what about the exterior look of it?
Well, that is exactly as it was, as we hope, in 1930. We spent 3 or 4 days totally measuring the thing and taking thousands of pictures so that we could come back here and the draftsman could then recreate it rivet for rivet.
And how much detail were those photographs?
Oh, we came up to taking pictures of door vents 2 or 3 inches away, so that they were really big size, so we could then copy them or find ship's chandlers in England that would have this sort of gear in
what
business.
Sort of period was the boat you were looking for, the boat of the story?
Well, anything prior to 1930 would have done us, but obviously the older the boat was, the more character it had. And this one was built in 1901, built in Scotland, in fact. The engines came from a yard in East Scotland, and they all worked with a bit of help from us. So again, we were raring to go then.